Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second science. How are we pronouncing it nice? No, welcome to the second science showcase of the month. My name's Steve Cross. I am not an expert health engineer. I am merely a host, but everybody else here is going to be an incredible healthcare engineer. So this session is brought to you by the UCL Institute of Healthcare Engineering. This is them here. You can go and find them on the Twitter if you Twitter. This is their name written out in words. Wait, got a point right there. Point. It's hard this because the video is mirrored. But that's their name in words. So what we've got for you is what the Institute call their Impact Fellows. Now, these are people whose research is absolutely cutting edge and it's absolutely in the real world. We're not going to be talking about great esoteric types of research. We're talking about things that impact lives on a regular basis. Each of our wonderful fellows is going to talk for about 5 minutes, and then in between I'll just check in, see how things are going, make sure YouTube's working, all that sort of boring hosty stuff. Just a quick thing about this being, because it's a live event, unless you're watching the recordings on YouTube, in which case it's not a live event, but it's a live event, and part of the live event is the audience experience. So to improve your audience experience, what I'd like you to do is whenever I introduce people, I want you to clap and cheer for them absolutely wildly, even if it's just you sitting at your desk on your own, or you in your house, or you on a bus watching on your phone, whatever it is. And even if you're watching the recording, have a bit of a clap. It might make you feel good. Now I'm going to bring our very first speaker onto the screen. So what I'll do with each one is I'll bring them up just before I introduce them, and this is so they can check that they've unmuted themselves. There we go, Lizzie, proving my point marvelously. So wherever you are, friends, wherever you are, I'd like you to get ready for a dose of extreme fascination, and would you please welcome onto your screens and into your lives the marvelous Lizzie.
Hi, thank you. Wow. Hi, everyone. My name is Lizzie, and I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the Center for Medical Image Computing at UCL. I'm a physicist, and I use my physics background to develop new imaging technologies for looking inside the body. Specifically, I use MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, for looking inside the brain at something called the blood-brain barrier. Now, I'll come on in a little bit to MRI and why this is such a special imaging method. But first, I want to tell you about the blood-brain barrier and why it's important. So the blood-brain barrier is a highly specialized filter that surrounds the blood vessels in the brain and protects the brain from all kinds of toxins. Unfortunately, in a huge range of neurological disorders, including dementia and Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, stroke, even cancer, the blood-brain barrier becomes damaged. So what does that mean, damaged? If we think about blood, we know it transports all kinds of molecules around the body that are needed by various different organs to function properly. Think amino acids or proteins, sugars like glucose. Even though they might be processed or produced by other organs, many of these molecules can be harmful to the brain. There might also be other toxins in the blood that need to be kept out of the brain before they're cleared out of our system. The blood-brain barrier is the guard that controls the passage of all of these particles in and out of the brain. Now, imagine a blood vessel. We can think of it as a long, thin cylinder whose walls are made up of different kinds of cells. Each cell type has a different role and provides individual pathways for the necessary molecules, like glucose, to enter the brain at specific rates and concentrations. They're a bit like bouncers at a club, controlling the number and proportion of everything inside. These bouncer cells provide a tight seal around the blood vessel, in the healthy brain that is. When the blood-brain barrier becomes damaged, this seal around the vessel starts letting particles, including some of those toxins, slip across indiscriminately. The filter becomes leaky. Now, there are already quite established imaging methods for detecting high levels of leakiness, but at this point, the damage to the blood-brain barrier is already quite significant. Imagine instead if we were able to detect the very subtle damage that happens at the onset of a disease. We could use this information to start treatment earlier or to predict the likely progression of a disease. We could use it to learn more about the disease because there are still so many unknowns in neurological disorders. For instance, which brain region becomes damaged first? Why? Can we target these brain regions during treatment? Why does one patient experience more symptoms than another when they've both had the same disease for a similar length of time? This is really the goal of my research, trying to detect damage to the blood-brain barrier earlier on so we can understand diseases better. So how can we use MRI for this? Now, I mentioned earlier that MRI was quite a unique imaging method. Some of you may have had an MRI before, but for anyone less familiar, an MRI machine is essentially a large tube-shaped magnet. It looks a bit like a CT scanner, if you're more familiar with those, but slightly longer. Unlike a CT scanner, though, which uses X-rays to take a shadow picture of the body, the MRI scanner uses powerful magnetic fields around 60,000 times stronger than the Earth's magnetic field and radio waves to take the image. We're able to take the pictures this way because inside our body we have tiny particles called protons, which behave like tiny magnets. That means that when you lie inside the MRI scanner, all your protons temporarily align with the magnetic field, like a compass in the Earth's magnetic field. We can program the MRI scanner to use a combination of its magnetic field and radio wave pulses to excite your protons into emitting signals that we can detect and use to build a picture. The really unique thing about MRI is that we can tune the magnetic fields and radio waves to adjust the image contrast and highlight certain things in the body we're interested in looking at. A bit like in photography, where you can use different settings to adjust for light levels, or color, or distance. Now, if we think back to the blood-brain barrier and how particles start leaking across when the barrier becomes damaged, we can try and tune the MRI scanner to pick up signals just from those particles crossing the blood-brain barrier. The problem is that this signal is small and difficult to pick up. And so that's the focus of my research. I work on designing new ways of tuning the magnetic fields and radio waves of the MRI scanner to amplify the signal from those particles crossing the blood-brain barrier. In doing this, the aim is to get more information on that really low level of blood-brain barrier damage or leakiness that happens at the onset of a disease, in the hope that one day we are better able to understand, diagnose, and treat neurological disorders such as dementia and multiple sclerosis. Thank you so much for listening.
Amazing, Lizzie. I sometimes feel with these talks that I'm just sitting here learning new things to worry that might be happening to me. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for talking to us about your marvelous, marvelous work. For those of you who don't know, MRI stands for magnets radiating your insides. And you might meet neuroscientists. They do a thing called fMRI, which stands for flipping magnets radiating your insides. I'm going to bring you on another expert to get away from my puns. Sorry about those, but they stimulate a special section of your brain, the pun region. There's a lot of research into it. Now, our next wonderful speaker is Ben. I'm going to bring Ben up onto the screen. Hello, Ben. Is everything good with you? Well, you see, we did the thing where we checked that Ben was muted so we don't launch him in. There's some high professionalism going on in this event, listeners. So wherever you are, we're going to introduce Ben to the screen. You're going to try and ignore his washing that's behind him. That's very important. Would you please welcome onto the metaphorical stage the wonderful Ben?
Hello, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm Ben, and I'm a researcher at UCL, and I work with nanoparticles for medical applications. So first I'll tell you about nanoparticles. So nanoparticle in this case, nano in this case is a length scale, which is about 1 million times smaller than the width of a hair. So a nanoparticle is just simply a nano-sized particle, a bit of something, a very small bit of something. For example, a gold nanoparticle is just a very small bit of gold. And you will actually all have seen gold nanoparticles before with your naked eye. And that's because there are gold nanoparticles in lateral flow tests for COVID and for other diseases. So the color of the red lines, or hopefully just one line, is produced by gold nanoparticles. And although one gold nanoparticle is too small to see, the accumulation of many gold nanoparticles produces those red lines that you can see. The way these tests work is that you want to detect an antigen, which is just a part of the SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes COVID-19. And if you find the antigen in somebody's sample, then that person is infected. So these proteins are invisible to the naked eye and to a microscope because they're very small. So what we can do is we can attach something to the surface of the gold nanoparticles that will stick only to this specific COVID-19 antigen. So we know that if we see the gold nanoparticles, we know that they're stuck to an antigen. So we know that there is antigen in the sample. So we're kind of taking something that we can't see and sticking it to something that we can see. And this technique works for many diseases. And in future, I hope that we might be able to test for hundreds of diseases at home using simple low-cost tests. The problem is that current lateral flow tests can't detect very small amounts. So this is important for detecting diseases early before they have a chance to spread, or improving prognosis by allowing earlier treatment, and detecting diseases that are just present in lower amounts. So these tests are great, but I think that we have a better way to detect smaller amounts by using a different material instead of the gold nanoparticles. So I work with diamond nanoparticles, another kind of precious material. So these are just, as I said, nano-sized diamonds that are made by crushing up a larger diamond into smaller pieces with a mill. So pure diamond is formed of carbon in a regular repeating structure. So each carbon is bound to 4 other carbons. And this is because each carbon has 4 electrons in its outer shell, and it wants 8. So it shares 4 electrons with 4 from neighboring carbon atoms. So you have this regular carbon lattice, and all of them are attached to 4 others. But the diamond nanoparticles I work with have a particular impurity or a defect in the lattice that I'm interested in. And what this is you have a nitrogen instead of one of the carbons, and then right next to it, where another carbon should be, it's actually just a missing carbon. So you have all of your carbons, and then you have one nitrogen in there and one kind of missing one. And this means there are these extra unbound electrons just kind of floating around. And that's why I'm interested in these nanoparticles. So these extra electrons can absorb light, and that puts them into an excited state where they have lots of extra energy, and they want to release this energy and relax. So what they do is emit light, but they actually emit light of a different color than they absorb. And this is called fluorescence. So in the case of these diamond nanoparticles, when we shine green light on them, they glow red. And what we hope is that these particles can be detected more sensitively than gold nanoparticles by shining green light on them and looking for this red glow. And in that way, hopefully, if we can detect smaller amounts of nanoparticles, then that means we can detect smaller amounts of virus. So the problem with using fluorescence in lateral flow tests is that the material that the test is made from also has high levels of fluorescence. So looking for low quantities of fluorescent nanoparticles is like if you went to a party with a friend and they said they'd wear a red glow stick necklace kind of thing. So you'd be able to find them easily, but you arrive and it's very dark and everyone's wearing red glow sticks. And actually, maybe they're wearing all sorts of other colors as well. That would make your friend very difficult to find. So going back to the nanoparticles, but we will come back and find your friend. The really interesting thing about these particular nanoparticles is not just that they fluoresce red, but also that we can turn the fluorescence up and down, or kind of on and off, using an electromagnetic field or magnets, which we can easily apply to the test. And this means we can make them flash at a rate that we choose. And this also means that only those nanoparticles will flash, and all other sources of light will remain constant. So back to the party, if instead of a regular glow stick, your friend put on a flashing glow stick, and everyone else had kind of inferior regular glow sticks that didn't flash, then I think that maybe your friend would be easier to find. You just look for the flashing glow stick. And so this is what we do. We look for the flashing nanoparticles in this sea of other fluorescence. And we can detect them more easily. And this means that we can detect smaller amounts of virus and improve sensitivity. And that means, hopefully down the line, we can detect diseases earlier and, as I said, reduce spread and improve prognosis. Thanks very much. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions.
If you do have questions for Ben, you can tweet them to @health_eng. All the questions that the other acts are asking him are, how many lateral flow tests do I need to get to scrape together enough gold to buy something? Marvelous work, Ben. Marvelous work. I loved the bit in the middle where Ben luxury upgraded. He'd been talking about gold nanoparticles, but that clearly wasn't expensive enough. He moved straight up to diamond. Absolutely fantastic. Right, let me do a quick little check of who's next. Perfect. Right, good. I'll bring our next speaker onto the screen. Hello there. So wherever you are, viewers, got another engineering and healthcare related treat for you. So please give a huge round of applause for the marvelous Sarah.
Hello, I'm Sarah, and I've had loads of MRI scans over the last year. I will have spent over 10 hours lying in a magnetic field, that's 60,000 times stronger than the Earth's magnetic field, and I'm fine. Even though I've been in such a strong magnetic field, no harm or damage has been done to my body because MRI scans are safe, unlike X-rays which use ionizing radiation. Whilst I was having all of my MRI scans, I was inhaling pure oxygen, because when a person in the scanner inhales pure oxygen, their MRI scans change in different ways that can tell us information about how their lungs are working. This is what I'm interested in, and it's what my research focuses on, assessing the lungs using inhaled oxygen during MRI scans. We've scanned lots of healthy volunteers over the last 6 months, and now we're about to start scanning chronic lung disease patients, people that have got long COVID, and also lung cancer patients, to test out how well our technique performs in the lungs of non-healthy volunteers. I just told you that the magnet is 60,000 times stronger than the Earth's magnetic field, but despite this, having an MRI scan is safe. You might have wondered what it feels like being inside such a strong magnet and how strong the strong magnet is. Disappointingly, you wouldn't feel anything unusual when you're lying inside an MRI scanner, as long as you don't have any magnetizable metal inside you. To give you an idea of how strong the magnet is, if I walked into the MRI scanner room holding my little toy koala that's made of metal, and I walked to within roughly a metre of the scanner, suddenly my koala would fly out of my hand, it would whiz through the MRI scanner, it would fly out the other side and probably end up stuck to the back of the scanner. So it is a very strong magnet. I said that I've had loads of MRI scans over the last year, and here's one I had earlier. We've taken the images in this direction. In the animation, you can see that I'm breathing and my heart is beating. These images were taken over 10 minutes, and during that time, I would have been inhaling pure oxygen so that we could assess how my lungs were working. But how does inhaling pure oxygen help me to assess how someone's lungs are working from their MRI images? When a person breathes in pure oxygen, the oxygen gas will enter their lungs as normal air would. The impact of the inhaled oxygen on the MRI image is to decrease the brightness of the lung tissue due to a physics property of the oxygen gas in the lung. When the oxygen gas is absorbed and it's dissolved within the blood in the lungs, the MRI image will instead increase in brightness. Inhaling pure oxygen therefore results in two different opposite effects in the MRI image, which we can use to assess the lungs by looking at the transfer of oxygen through the lungs, and we can't do this with X-rays or the other imaging methods that are used in hospitals. All hospitals have oxygen supplies, which makes inhaled oxygen MRI really easy to do. And as we're using this technique to study how the lungs are working, we can apply it to many different lung diseases. However, if you went to hospital to have a lung scan, you'd almost certainly have an X-ray or a 3D X-ray called a CT scan instead of having a lung MRI scan. X-ray images and CT scans are common because they're fast and they're cheap and they're easy to analyse compared to lung MRI scans. So if CT scans and X-rays are already being used regularly in hospitals, why am I researching the use of MRI scanners for lung imaging? X-ray images use ionizing radiation, and this can damage healthy tissue. When someone has many X-ray images taken of the same organ, the accumulated radiation dose can become significant. This is a problem when X-ray imaging is used to monitor chronic lung diseases, as the patient's lungs would be imaged over many years. Another patient group where long-term imaging using X-rays is undesirable is for long COVID, which over 2 million people in England are estimated to have. As long COVID is being experienced by younger people, it's especially important to avoid causing potential damage to healthy tissue by using ionizing radiation with X-ray imaging. We always want to minimize the risks when we scan someone, which is why MRI is of great interest as a safe alternative imaging method to X-rays. For this reason, chronic lung diseases and long COVID are two of the patient groups that we're going to start testing our technique in. The other major benefit of MRI over X-ray imaging when we're looking at the lungs is in the amount of information that we can gain. As I described earlier, inhaling pure oxygen during an MRI scan can enhance features of the lungs in the MRI scans, which can provide us with information about how the lungs are working, and this is really useful data for the clinicians. So this is all of these reasons are why I've spent so long lying inside the MRI scanner over the last year. We've been testing and improving our oxygen-held MRI technique before we start applying it to lung disease patients. Our aim is that at some point in the future, if you went into hospital needing a lung scan, instead of having an X-ray or a CT scan, which use ionizing radiation, you'd have a safe oxygen-held MRI scan. Thank you for listening.
Wonderful, wonderful stuff. And a quick reminder for everybody, you can post comments in the YouTube chat and I can then use those comments to entertain our speakers. Alice says poor koala. I would like to remind Alice that it was a fiction. Sarah would never take her actual metal koala into an actual MRO room. That would be very, very silly indeed. Now, I need to introduce our next wonderful speaker. There's just a little bit of rearrangement going on behind the scenes. There's a secret green room that you can't all see, but I can. Wonderful. Here's our next speaker, Maitri. Now, Maitri is in front of some very intimidating equations, and I don't want you all to be scared off by that, because I know that Maitri is actually a very comprehensible, very relatable, very friendly speaker. So don't let the equations put you off, but do applaud our wonderful engineering expert, Maitri.
Thank you so much, Steve. Okay, so think back to the last time you had a cold. You probably had a blocked nose, a pounding headache, and a sore throat, but then you got better. However, when somebody's brain is sick, recovery isn't so straightforward. Hello, my name is Maitri, and I'm a research fellow at the Center of Medical Image Computing at UCL. I use my background in machine learning, which I'll talk about more in a bit, and psychology to understand what happens when someone's brain is sick and how can we help them. Now, our brain is made up of billions of cells or neurons, and these are connected to one another via a vast number of pathways. Now, just like we commute from one place to another via motorways, these neurons communicate or talk to each other through these pathways, and thereby enable us to perform anything and everything from moving around, learning new things at school, making new friends and talking to them, or just remembering the list of things you want to buy from the supermarket. Now, how would you feel if someone you knew or cared for could no longer do all these things and there was no cure? Okay, so you might wonder why would this happen? Well, turns out these billions of neurons and the interconnections between them are crucial for our survival and good health. However, there are certain brain illnesses called the neurodegenerative diseases, where neuro means brain and degeneration means breaking down. So when the brain gets sick, neurons in certain parts of the brain start dying, and as a result, the connections between them start breaking, as if they're being cut by scissors. Now, this results in miscommunication or no communication between different parts of the brain. And as the disease progresses, more and more parts of the brain get affected, and ultimately the patient sadly dies. Now, one such very severe disorder, for example, is the Huntington's disease, which over the course of 15 to 20 years gradually diminishes a person's ability to walk, talk, think, and reason. And it hits typically between the ages 30 and 45. The worst part, however, is that people often go to the doctor when they start seeing some noticeable symptoms. However, that is too late. That is when the last dominoes have fallen. The first domino falls decades earlier without anyone realizing anything. And so we lose such a huge window during which treatment is likely to be most effective. So the focus of my research is twofold. First is the early detection of disease, and second is the accurate and reliable prediction of the rate of progression of disease. Just like cancer, neurodegenerative diseases also have different stages, and with each consecutive stage, a patient's condition deteriorates and treatment becomes less effective. So, one of the main problems faced by doctors and clinicians is that there isn't one single test that can tell how the disease will progress. Instead, they have to consider many different things, such as a patient's brain's MRI scans, their blood test reports, they have to test a patient's memory, their reading ability, and many other abilities all together to make an informed guess. And even then, the certainty in that guess isn't very high. This is where machine learning comes in. So, machine learning is the capability of a machine to copy intelligent human behavior. Just like we humans learn from our experience, machine learning methods learn from data. Now, say for example, we want our machine to identify cats, big cats, small cats, literally any kind of cat. So to begin with, we will show lots and lots of example photos of all kinds of cats to our machine. This collection of example photos is called the dataset, Now, the machine looks at the data set, it learns how a cat looks like, and then when we show a previously unseen photograph of a cat, the machine makes a guess based on what it has learned. This guess is called the prediction. Now, the prediction could be right or it could be wrong. If it is wrong, then the machine will learn from its mistake, it will correct it, and it will adjust its learning to perform better next time. Now, for disease prediction, though, we don't use cat photos, obviously. And like I said before, we use patients' blood test results. We see the MRI scans of their brain. We see how good their memory is, their reading ability, their mobility, and some other things to train these machine learning methods. Then we use these trained machine learning methods to predict when the symptoms will start developing, that is disease onset, or at what stage a patient is currently in, and at what rate they will progress. So, in the end of the training, the machine learning methods tell us something like this, that a patient is currently at stage 1, in 5 years they'll move to stage 2, in 7 years in stage 3, and so on. Why is this so important? Well, this is very important because it helps clinicians in giving the right treatment options to patients, and it allows patients to plan their life accordingly. To date, there is no disease modifying medicine, so the very least we can do is to detect the disease as early as possible and then provide the most accurate and reliable rate of progression. And this gives people living with neurodegenerative conditions and their families the best shot at life. Thank you.
Amazing. That was one of the best introductions to machine learning that I've ever heard. And it was part of a much wider and more interesting talk. Matri, thank you so much. That was
Thank you.
absolutely wonderful. Slightly blown away by that one. I've never heard anyone get machine learning across that well, that quickly. Let's crack on, shall we? I've got another incredible impact fellow from the Institute of Healthcare Engineering for you. I'm going to bring him up on screen so we can do the usual checks. Yes, we can see him. Yes, he's not muted. Amazing. Please, wherever you are, give us a big, big, big round of applause for the very, very intelligent Ken.
Thank you, Steve. Hi, everyone. I will talk about my research. It is about helping people with diabetes to lead a better life using the latest technology, in particular artificial intelligence, or AI for short, which let machine become as smart as human beings. So firstly, what is diabetes? So diabetes is a lifelong disorder characterized by high blood sugar. Yes, you're right, too much sugar in blood. So why does this happen? Because patient's pancreas, located here, has been damaged. It cannot produce enough insulin to lower the blood sugar. So diabetes is a common disease, which is about 1 in every 11 adults. For example, if there are 20 children in one class, after the 20 children grow up, there is high chance that 2 of them will have diabetes someday. It is terrible. Normally, if a person needs to go to the loo a lot, feeling thirst or hunger easily, or getting fatter or thinner for unknown reason, probably is because of diabetes. If left untreated, diabetes may cause many other diseases that will hurt people's heart, kidney, or eyes. Unfortunately, there is no cure for diabetes. The only way to handle diabetes is to maintain your blood sugar in a target range, not too high, not too low, by having proper food plus medicine or insulin injection. So essentially, if the blood sugar is rising too high, we need to give the patient some insulin to decrease the blood sugar. If the blood sugar is dropping too low, we need to give the patient some snacks or food to increase the blood sugar. If the blood sugar could be controlled in the target range for a longer time, the people will be much healthier. It sounds easy, but actually it is not so straightforward. So people are very different, you know. Some are young children, some are senior people over 80 years old. Some have healthy food and do exercise every day. Some like to eat high-calorie food and working long hours, so no time to do sports. So all of these affect blood sugar, and it is impossible to have a standard formula to tell people when and what food to take or how many units of insulin to inject. Here is how AI can help us actually. With efforts from scientists, clinicians, and engineers, we believe that AI will allow people with diabetes to manage their blood sugar much easier and safer. So how AI can help us? The answer is to use AI as a personal lifestyle advisor. So this advisor that could be installed as an app on your smartphones will help people to maintain their blood sugar in the target range by providing instant notifications and suggestions. For example, if the blood sugar is rising too high or dropping too low, the app can pop up notifications to remind people about it and give suggestions of food intake or insulin injection instantly. If the person wants to have a big meal as lunch, for example, Friday, fish and chips, the AI advisor may calculate the right dose of insulin based on personal health conditions. If the person decides to take an exercise, AI may estimate the blood sugar change during the exercise to prevent low blood sugar. So AI can also provide long-term lifestyle recommendations about food choice, supports, or sleeping time, etc., to let patients lead a healthy life. This AI advisor can be more powerful if people wear a wristband or smartwatch. So in summary, we believe that in the future, people with diabetes will suffer less and can manage their blood sugar much easier with the help of AI. Thank you for your attention.
That was absolutely incredible. Lovely comment from Leslie in the chat. This really good uses. Wait, I'll bring it up here. Look, just exciting to see uses of AI that aren't just facial recognition. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Ken. Lovely to hear from you. Now, I've got one more healthcare engineering expert from you. We won't call them a headliner because everybody's good, but they're last, which is usually known as the headline slot in the world of comedy. So first, let's bring them up, double check everything's working. Yes, we can see David. Yes, David's not muted. So wherever you are, huge round of applause, please, for our final act, but definitely not a headliner because everybody's equally good. David.
Thank you, Steve. Our compare beyond compare. Let's hear it for Steve. And behind the scenes, let's also hear it for Alice Hardy. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm David Ruttenberg. I'm a UCL engineer in cognitive neuroscience, scientist rather, and I'll be discussing technologies that may help people who are sensitive to things like sound, lights, and other stimuli, and how these affect their performance and comfort at school, work, and social situations. So let's start first with a little imagination exercise by having you shut your eyes. Now, if you're uneasy about closing your eyes, just leave them open and participate in any way that makes you feel comfortable. For the next few moments, I'd like you to think about your brain and imagine that it's wired differently from everyone else you know. Imagine that your brain causes you to experience life like you are constantly riding on a roller coaster. Literally, from morning to night, the world is coming at you at 100 kilometers an hour. You have sweaty palms, your body's shaking, and you're feeling excited, anxious, and fatigued. Daily tasks are nearly impossible, however, because everything is a blur. Sounds are incredibly distracting too. Remember, this ride goes on and on every single day, week after week, and year after year. Worst of all, no one has the slightest clue what you're going through. It's like being in your own private and really poorly designed amusement park. You're the only one there. You can't get out of the park. You can't get off the ride. And to the rest of the world, your experiences are completely invisible. Okay, now open your eyes if they're closed and know that I didn't just make any of this up. There are medical journals that describe the phenomenon. And while I don't suffer from this, I'm very familiar with it. That's because for nearly 20 years, I've been studying how this roller coaster effect influences so many amazing, fascinating, and wonderfully diverse people who could contribute even more to our world if we just took time to acknowledge what they're experiencing. See, back in 2003, my wife and I, Susie, decided to start a family, and that's when our daughter Phoebe was born. Phoebes is a wickedly smart, gorgeous, curly, red-haired kid who received an autism diagnosis when she was 2.5 years old, followed by an attention deficit label shortly after that, and then eventually an epilepsy label. With Susie's incredible leadership and a handful of great therapists, Phoebe, who just turned 19 a couple of weeks ago, now has a full shot at life. But when Phoebe was young, we noticed she enjoyed music. She was always bopping around our home, dancing and rocking out, even when there was no sound happening. With no music, I was wondering, what is she rocking out to? Well, it turns out she wasn't hearing songs in her head. No, Phoebe was on her own private roller coaster. See, Phoebe makes sense of her surroundings differently because her brain is wired differently. In fact, 90% of neurodiverse adults like Phoebe report sensitivity, attention, and mental health difficulties because of this wiring. And when I say mental health, I'm not talking about schizophrenia or post traumatic stress disorder. I'm talking about things we can all relate to: anxiety and fatigue. Now, when you're a parent and your child is suffering, you'll do anything to help if they're sensitive to their environment, or even if their sensitivity comes from within their body. Some families use earplugs or ear defenders. Others use noise canceling devices or fidget spinners to reduce their anxiety. Now, these aren't necessarily ideal because while they do reduce noise and have a calming effect, they don't make classroom learning any easier. And you can't communicate with people if you're cut off from your environment. And these do nothing if you're visually or physically sensitive. And I've thought about this a lot and wondered if technological solutions could enhance a person's experience by alerting, filtering, and guiding them around their sensitivities. So I've been designing and researching devices that can increase a person's performance and comfort even before they feel like they're on a roller coaster. These technologies work just like a pair of eyeglasses or hearing aids, except that they actively monitor and enhance a person's perception of their environments and their reactivity based upon their customized needs. So if you're a person who is easily distracted by loud and low bass sounds coming from nearby automobiles, the technology will not only notify you of that approaching car, it'll also filter out the offending sounds while leaving the rest of your hearing intact. And if you happen to be in an amusement park, it'll warn you to stay away from roller coasters because it's actually looking for and listening for them before you even stumble upon them. Accommodations like these are controlled by the wearer as easily as selecting ringtones or screensavers on a mobile phone. And in fact, more than 400 people helped me produce, and some even tested these technologies. I'll provide you with a link in a second if you're interested to learn more. But for now, I hope that when you notice someone having difficulty waiting in line, or dealing with customer service, or negotiating a ride with an Uber driver, and you can't quite figure out why they're stressed or frustrated, you'll remember the roller coaster and that their invisible experiences matter. These folks deserve our understanding, our help, and our respect so that they can have the most fulfilling and meaningful lives possible. Here's the link that I promised you. Please be safe out there. Have a lovely remainder of your day, and thank you. Thank you for listening.
Marvelous, marvelous. And David, I mean, outside of the technology, is such a vital message for all of us to be aware of the symptoms of neurodiversity and how they might be what's going on, and not, as people often shout at each other on the train, terrible parenting. Brilliant. Thank you so much, David. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be with all of you. I should say, if you've got any questions for any of our speakers, Dave gave you his website. You can tweet at health_eng, and they will either answer your question or they'll find someone to answer your question. I think you can probably find everybody's email addresses as well online. It's one of the nice things about academic and research speakers is if you Google them, it just gives you a direct line straight to them. Don't call them, they're very busy, and it's 2022, no one uses a phone anymore. Just email them instead. It's been a huge pleasure to work with all of them. What an absolutely wonderful set of speakers. So what I'm going to do, dear viewers, if it's all right with you, is I'm going to bring them all back, and we're going to give them a big final round of applause to say thank you for doing all this. And I'm also going to bring back the brains behind the whole thing. Alice, who's been so marvelous making this whole program happen. So massive, massive round of applause for all of our speakers. Look at them all there. Aren't they such a lovely, lovely, wholesome bunch? It's been a real pleasure working with all of you viewers. It's been a real pleasure entertaining you, and look after yourselves. Have a lovely week. Bye-bye.